The reason why we've got America and Russia sitting down with no one else inside Saudi Arabia at the minute is that nobody knows what the Russian starting position is.
Let's take a walk into our debate this evening, and it relates to what we've been hearing from Keir Starmer. He said he's willing to send British troops to act as a peacekeeping force in Ukraine once a deal to end the war has been negotiated. The Prime Minister says that the offer isn't one he has taken lightly, adding that he feels very deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way. He's been in Paris tonight for emergency talks with fellow European leaders over the future of Ukraine as the US initiates those negotiations in Saudi Arabia with Russia without the input of Europe. I'm joined now by Mark Seddon, Director of the Centre for United Nations Studies at the University of Buckingham. Good evening to you, Mark.
Good evening.
Hello,
Good
and
evening.
Philip Ingram MBE, former British military intelligence officer. Good evening, Philip.
Good evening.
To talk about whether boots on the ground is a good idea or not, Mark Seddon, let's begin with you. Does this make sense? The UK stepping up and being one of the first nations, well, in fact, the first European military power to offer boots on the ground in Ukraine. Is that a good idea?
Well, I mean, this is all before we even know what Trump and Putin are going to be discussing in Saudi Arabia. But look, having said that, my dad was in the army. He was in the British Army on the Rhine at a time when it amounted to, in terms of personnel, rather more than the British Army does today. The Keir Starmer could be talking about committing troops at this time when we're not really capable of doing it. And Bloomberg this evening are running a report claiming that should these defence increases go ahead, then government departments can be looking at 11% cuts. Now, you could say, well, look, if this is so vital to us, then yes, we should be prepared to cut everything and take this great risk. But I note that Germany isn't, Poland isn't. I mean, Germany, for quite obvious reasons, the idea of German troops in Ukraine is not a particularly good one. But we just do not understand how Keir Starmer can be taking this initiative without actually apparently discussing this with other European countries, first of all. At the very least, from this very imperfect Trump-Putin discussion, peace negotiations, if you like, from two leaders who are threatening to invade other countries, by the way. It would be very nice to hear something about Britain's support for Canada, for instance. It is absolutely premature. It's highly... Peacekeepers have to take aim at whoever breaks the peace agreements. That could be Russians, it could be Ukrainians.
Well,
it
does depend on the terms of what that peacekeeping force is. That would have to be clarified. Philip Ingram.
Can I jump in? I've actually planned operations like this and executed them at very high levels. I was the planning coordinator for NATO taking over from the United Nations in Bosnia. I was a senior intelligence planner for NATO and its actions into Kosovo. So I've got a good degree of experience in where we are in the planning process. Keir Starmer is being slightly premature in saying that we put British troops on the ground, but he's doing it for good political reasons. Good political reasons. One, we're a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. We need to step up. Two, the United States will be looking to the UK to try and lead Europe in the way that the UK has done so far when it comes to support for Ukraine. And that is why the Secretary for Defence, John Healey, chaired the Ukraine Contact Group last week, the first time it was a non-American chairing it. And the other thing is then looking at leadership inside Europe and trying to politically force other European countries into a position where they would have to refuse to participate in what's going on. And he's sending a message out to the United States, who I think have said, Keir, you need to step up.
Yeah.
But also to the Russians saying, we'd get there.
Look, he could be grandstanding in front of the United States. He's after a trade deal. He's after very good relations with Donald Trump, and maybe he's prepared to put his name to this. But be careful what you wish for. We were discussing with Kitty Donaldson earlier how perhaps the US will be happy with a broker of sorts from not from the EU, but someone who represents European nations, and that could be Keir Starmer for obvious reasons.
In planning terms, and this is why I said it's premature, we are a long, long way off physical boots being on the ground, and we're not in a position to provide them.
I mean, Philip, we just don't have them. I think we really need. We
don't have them as a sustainable way to put a force on the ground with the right level of protection that's there. But having found these, it takes months and years to do that.
Okay, but why is Keir Starmer offering this then? If this will take months and years to happen, and by the way, Donald Trump's advisors have been saying that he wants the peace deal done, or a peace deal done, by Easter. That's 60 odd days.
I don't blame Keir Starmer for trying to take a lead. But if you're going to take a lead, then you need presumably to talk to other European countries first. Germany has said no. Poland has said no. We're at a stage when, if you're talking about, we've got to wait and see what happens in Saudi Arabia first of all. But if we're talking about peacekeeping operations, and by the way, many of the people now talking about this were in favour of firing Storm King missiles into Russia not so long ago. And thought Storm Shadow, but also they thought that Ukraine was going to have the Crimea back. All of this sort of stuff. Now we've moved to this situation, and frankly, it doesn't seem to be thought through. You could.
No, I'm sorry. From a military perspective, the detail behind this will have been planned in our permanent joint headquarters, the Joint Force headquarters, as part of Strategic Command. The J5 Plans branch will have been working scenarios for this for the last 2 years, because that's what planners do. The same thing will have been happening in all the European countries and in the United States as well. So they will be planning of 3 things: a worst-case scenario, a best-case scenario, and a most likely scenario. And that will get refined as the political direction starts to get refined. So this is the first time.
Hang on.
This is the first time we're getting political direction refined.
Hang on, Mark, just a second.
The reason why we've got America and Russia sitting down with no one else inside Saudi Arabia at the minute is that nobody knows what the Russian starting position is, and Donald Trump hasn't had a chance to poke Lavrov and Putin in the chest and say, this is what you're going to accept. Zelensky has given Donald Trump a very detailed plan on what he would accept on a road to peace. He did that before the inauguration. He's been back to see him since the inauguration.
Sorry, Philip. Trump, if I may, President Trump actually said exactly what he thought would come from this. He went back to that much earlier position they had about Ukraine not joining NATO, all of this sort of stuff, which seemed extraordinary to lay everything out on the line before you start.
Hang on a second, Philip.
If I could just finish now, I think that clearly, finally, we may be moving towards a peace situation in Ukraine and Russia, and one that we must hope that Ukraine must not be made to suffer from being invaded. But we also have to be realistic, and it may be that a multinational peace force is got to be envisaged, and not necessarily countries that have been seen as protagonists in all of this. And Keir Starmer should really not be, in my view, committing British forces when it's clear that we don't have the forces to commit without a proper plan. And I'm old enough to remember that we've been dragged into a series of wars without proper planning. And look where we've got Afghanistan.
We're very early for the detail of how this is going to come out. Donald Trump is making statements to get Putin to the negotiating table. Donald Trump has got a history of saying something very controversial and then rolling back on it. And this is what he's doing. So he's forced Putin to come to a negotiating table. He's getting face-to-face meetings in Saudi Arabia to get that first position and understand what Russia wants. Russia's going to want something that's going to be unacceptable to everyone else. But Donald Trump's team will hopefully poke Lavrov in the chest and say, this is what you're going to accept. Now go away and talk about that. This is going to take weeks and months before we even get round the table and start to negotiate what a peace
even though Donald Trump's talked about urgency. Look, just before we run away with that, let me ask both your opinions on whether, if the UK do commit boots on the ground in Ukraine, should that be subject to a vote in Parliament? Should that be put before Parliament and a vote? Mark?
Yes, I think it should be. The war in Iraq was put before Parliament. Of course, Parliament wasn't exactly aware of the truth when that vote happened, but no, there must be a vote. But I think that there is this great rush to suddenly do this, and Keir Starmer also has to work out that beyond these substantial increases in defence spending that would be required for this to happen, there will have to be severe cuts across those parts of the government and the welfare and the NHS.
No.
This country. We're talking about 11% cuts across government departments.
I don't know where you're getting 11% from. I'm sorry. You've been the Chagos deal, and that will give you what you need for the first 2 or 3 years. If you then use that money to invest in our defence industry and underpin that will increase the number of roles in our manufacturing industry, the revenue that's coming in back into our taxpayers.
That's years down the line, though, Philip, isn't it? Years down the line.
But that's 3 to 5 years down the line. The Chagos deal, bin that tomorrow, and that would pay for it.
Well, look,
I'm sure Donald Trump on the
it is a Bloomberg story. I should say, hang on, it is a Bloomberg scoop. Government departments are bracing for cuts of up to 11% to fund defence. They were asked to model the 11% cuts as a worst-case scenario. Now it's looking like a reality, some of them fear. That is a Bloomberg story from Bloomberg, various colleagues there. So that is where that comes from, but that is about overall increase of defence spending. So that would be boots on the ground in Ukraine, but also probably several other measures needed.
I mean, not just Parliament, but I mean, the public need to be asked about all of this.
Philip, for you?
No. The public don't need to be asked. There's actually at the moment there's little.
Hang on, Mark.
Hang on. At the moment, there's little point in asking Parliament because the Labour Party, the party of government, has got such a big majority. This would be a 3-line whip, and they'll get it through anyway. But yes, I do think in this particular case, Parliament should be asked and Parliament should be debated because there isn't a timeline urgency to deal with it. However, Parliament needs to be aware if they do not agree to that, and there is a peace deal on the ground, and UK is being told to or been given the opportunity to lead it or take a leading role, then the message that would send not just to Vladimir Putin but to Xi Jinping and to other despot leaders around the world is that there's a free-for-all, so go for it. So we wouldn't be talking about 3.65% or 2.65% of GDP on defence. We would be talking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% of GDP on defence.
Philip,
we're going to have to leave it there. Sorry, chaps, for time. I mean, I could carry on with you both for minutes and minutes more, but we do have another feature to get to. It's been so interesting hearing from both of you, valid on both sides, I think. Mark Seddon, Director of the Centre for United Nations Studies at the University of Buckingham. Thank you, Mark. And Dr. Philip Ingram MBE, former British military intelligence officer. Thank you to you as well.